Today's program is on the role of Chief Justice, and it is my pleasure to introduce the folks that are here to talk about the role of Chief Justice. I've got to say, when I became clerk 19 years ago, embarrassingly, I thought the role of Chief Justice mainly was sitting as the big cheese in the middle of the bench at the Supreme Court and managing the Supreme Court. Obviously, it is much, much more. And I have had the privilege of serving with all three of these men, Chief Justice Henry Frye, Chief Justice Burley Mitchell, and we were going to have today Chief Justice Jim Exum, who is home with the flu and said we did not want him here. And Chief Justice Beverly Lake had to cancel at the last moment because his negotiations that he was a part of did not finish in time. So we have got quality. And there is so much. If I started talking about all the things that those two Chief Justices have done in their lives, we wouldn't have any more time for any more of the program. All I can say is it was a huge privilege to consider them my boss. And they did an incredible amount for the state of North Carolina, and most particularly for the judiciary in this state. The same can be said of our moderator, Freeman, who has served with every Chief Justice since Bobbitt in 1970 in one way or another, and is particularly qualified for being able to moderate a panel on the role of Chief Justice. He was a former director in the Administrative Office of the Courts for many years and was an Associate Justice on the Supreme Court, and along with many other titles of service to the state of North Carolina. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Franklin.
Thank you. Thank you, Christy. Good afternoon to all of you. Many years ago in my native Dobson, we were up at the cemetery one night putting our absentee ballot list together. And we ran up on this tombstone that had a lot of moss growing on it. And our leader said, scratch on it and see if you can bring the name up. So we scratched for some 5 or 10 minutes, could not bring the name up, turned and reported that to our leader. He said, keep on scratching, he's got as much right as anybody else in this cemetery to vote. Lord, don't you try that. That, in many ways, describes the role of Chief Justice. It is a role that requires the holder to constantly keep scratching. First and foremost, because the Chief Justice serves two functions. One is to preside over, I'll fertilize the pad out here with my questions. One is to preside over the court. The other is to preside over the judicial system. The Chief Justice appoints the Director of Administrative Office of Courts, appoints the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, appoints all the Chief District Court judges across the state. For starters, the Chief Justice is the Chief Executive of the judicial branch of government. So I want to begin by asking our panelists those two roles, presiding over the Supreme Court, and secondly, presiding over the court system, which now employs more than 5,000 people in the 100 counties. How did each of you, and I'll begin with Chief Justice Mitchell, he is the senior of the two Chief Justices here in terms of when he retired. Begin by asking each of you how you approached each of those roles. First, as the Chief Justice presiding over the court, and then secondly, as the Chief Justice responsible for the court system statewide. Chief Justice Mitchell.
Well, the first part is a role that you're well prepared for when you come to the court, which is dealing with the opinions ebb and flow of the workload there, setting the calendars, that sort of thing, and actually doing the work of the Supreme Court. And I think the best job on the court is as an associate justice, because that's kind of where it ends. And you can arrange that. I used to tell my law clerk, enjoy this. This is going to be the last time in your professional career until maybe 40 years from now where you're going to be able to control your schedule for any period of time, much less for any lengthy period of time. But the nice thing about it is, I always said that being an appellate judge was sort of like doing autopsies. You're past the point of the urgency of surgery or the immediacy of dealing with things that are hot that moment, and have more time to reflect. You know, if meal time comes, you stick your scalpel in your patient and go out to eat and come back. It's still going to be there. It's not going to change it. And that is a luxury that all of you folks know that you just don't have elsewhere in the law, except maybe in academia. And that was one of the things I found so delightful about the appellate bench was the time to actually sit down and work on the problem until you're done with it, and have done the best you can. So that part I was familiar with, knew how it worked, and so on. And I'm going to add a third job the Chief Justice has, which is you got to do your part in the court, preside over the court, so you got to be the administrator for the courts. Of course, having an administrative officer there, but also the third part of the job, and the one that's becoming more and more distasteful, is being a political candidate 365 days a year, every year, and having to deal with that aspect of the job, and that has become much more distasteful. The administrative part of the job I found really interesting. I had the advantage of having been in the system my entire career as an assistant attorney general, and then as the elected district attorney of Wake County and on the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, and thought I knew how it all worked pretty well. But I found out I didn't know nearly as well as I thought. And the immediate challenges, I always said the biggest part of my job, I don't not say this with all these judges in here. I used to say the biggest part of my job was Friday afternoons listening to judges whine. Everybody's got problems, and they had no place else to go. I mean, they might go to Franklin, but if that didn't play out, they'd come tell me about it. And there was it's the same whining I had done when I was an associate or when I was in other places in the system. So they weren't telling me anything new, but it made them feel good. And I could usually tell which ones had a legitimate gripe by whether they called me on Friday afternoon or Wednesday afternoon. If they would call me on Wednesday, they ended the calendar, gone home, and on the way to the golf course or something was griping at it. But really, a big part of it is sort of being a cheerleader, hearing about the needs, trying to sort out those first that need to be addressed, and then trying to figure out which ones you can do something about. But that is a full-time job, and you wind up having to go out to the DA's conferences, the district court judges' conferences, the superior court judges. That alone is more than a full-time job, and of course you have the administrative office of the courts to carry the lion's share of it, but a certain amount of it is just unavoidable. And I'm going to hush here now and let Justice Frye say something, but before I do, I became convinced, having said all this, at the end that there was some merit to what other states do, which is rotate the position of Chief Justice. Several states rotated, regular rotation 2 years at a time, and it gives everybody some of the sense of the problems. when I was an associate, I really didn't understand the problems of the Chief Justice. But their legion, but it's still the greatest position in the world, Justice Francis.
Well, let me start by saying that I came to the court after having served 14 years in the legislature. So I had met the Chief Justices before, and I had some knowledge of what the court system was about and the problems and things of that nature. When I came to the court, the Chief Justice was Joe Branch, and I thought, I mean, I was young, at that time, and I just thought he had so much wisdom, and the way he presided over the court and the way he talked to you about things was just, I was just extremely impressed with Joe Branch. He's deceased now. And then later on, I served on the Road of Billings under Jim Exum, and finally the gentleman he was with, Burley Mitchell. And so, as an associate justice, I was always watching to see what they did, why they did things the way they did, why they handled things at the court in certain ways and so forth. And every now and then, when I had nerve enough, suggested to them maybe how it could be improved. Now, when I first went, I was scared to talk to Joe Branch because he was my elder, if you understand. He's kind of like a father figure. You know how that works. You don't want to go talk to your father, tell him he's not doing things quite right. But so that was one of the experiences. But let me give you one thing that really was very interesting when I first went to the court. I've been practicing law in the legislature. I just worked on organizing a bank, and I was on the board of an insurance company, and also trying to raise children and everything. And I mean, I was moving. I was always moving. And so my secretary, who had been with me for years and years and years, knew how to screen calls and things of that nature. And if I started out the door, she would hand me the right folder, because I was also trying a few cases and things of that nature. And so when I got to the court, and we had an executive, by the way, I carried my secretary with me, thank goodness. And she started screening my calls, and boy, for about 3 or 4 months, I didn't get but 2 or 3 calls. So it was an abrupt change, All of a sudden, no longer were you being called every day about things and so forth. So anyway, I told her to stop screening my calls. Anybody call want to talk to me, let me talk to them. If they want to know the directions to the court, I'll be glad to. So that was a big change, always ripping and running, and now you're sitting there and dealing with those cases. So that's before I became Chief Justice. Well, when I became Chief Justice, the calls picked up. So she had to start back screening my calls. So that was the first thing. The second thing is that luckily we had Tom Ross, who had been a Superior Court judge and who had worked with the legislature and done a lot of other good things. Burley Mitchell got him to come in as administrative officer of the courts. And then that carried over with me. And I knew Tom Ross, and I knew, he was from Guilford County. I tried the case, I think, before him, or at least had been in the courtroom with him and things of that nature. So I knew him as a person that I could depend on. And so, other than talking to Burley Mitchell, I'm not being formal, Chief Justice Mitchell, he was Chief Justice at the time, and when he retired, I was appointed. And he probably had an inkling that I might be the next Chief Justice. The general practice was to appoint the most senior member of your party. It's almost always Democrats. Almost always, not always. And so I think he went out of his way to kind of nurture me and let me know about some of the things that he was doing and some of the challenges that he had which helped me. And Burley, I want to thank you for doing that, so get that out of the way. Anyway, so when I became Chief Justice, I'm on almost anything I do, I go to the books first. I went to the statute to see what the role of the Chief Justice was, and that type of thing. And Franklin mentioned that the director of the courts, the administrative officer of the courts, the director is appointed by the Chief Justice. What he didn't say, and what I think makes a difference is, at that time at least, he was appointed to serve at the pleasure of the Chief Justice. And then the same thing for the assistant director. So, again, Justice Mitchell had picked a good person as the assistant director, who was the special person who worked daily with the Chief Justice. That was Thomas Hilliard. He's still practicing law here in Wake County, I believe, now. And so, with Thomas Hilliard, he came by every day to see what I wanted done. In the case of Tom Ross, he would either call or come by or leave me a note or something every day about things that are going on and suggestions about how to handle it. And so it was an excellent working relationship with both of those people because I trusted them. And if I hadn't done that, I would have been probably in the asylum or somewhere in less than a year. But because both of them, one had, in addition to being a judge and all of those things, the other one had practiced law and knew a lot of the people, they were able to help me to, I think, do a fairly decent job as Chief Justice. Now, in terms of serving as Chief Justice of the court itself and inside the court, again, I learned from all of my predecessors about how to handle things. And so that was not a particularly difficult problem with me. On the court, in terms of voting, I don't know how many of you know that the voting is done after we discuss each case. We take a tentative vote, and the newest member of the court votes first, and then you go up the line. So the Chief Justice doesn't have to vote until till all of the others have voted. And one of the difficult things was every now and then it was three. I mean, how many of us are seven? Yeah, three. Three. So then the Chief Justice has got to make that decision. And that's sometimes a tough decision because I am sometimes slow about making up my mind how I want to vote. But we managed to handle that. And you notice I said tentative vote because after that, as whoever got the case to write it, if the person wrote an opinion that sounded good to you, you could switch sides and join that particular person. But that's that. I guess that's enough for starting, and I'll stop at this point and let you talk some more, ask some more questions, whichever you prefer.
Chief, let me continue with you. What was your greatest challenge during the time you were Chief Justice? You were Chief for
I was Chief for about a year and 4 months,
something like that.
4 months or something like that. My biggest challenge, factually, was that I had to try to be Chief Justice of the system and the court and run for office with the man who was on the court with me and running against me. Now you're talking about a challenge. All these other things are easy. I think most of you know that Beverly Lake Jr. Was on the court with me, and after I announced that I was going to run for, by the way, let me back up for those who are new to North Carolina or just don't remember, the Chief Justice as well as the Associate Justices were elected by the people. And when there was a vacancy, the governor could appoint someone, but the person would serve only until the next general election. So I was appointed in September, I guess it was, of 1999, and then I had to run for election in November of 2000. And so I got a lot of advice about what I should do. And I'll be open and tell you that some of my friends said I wouldn't write another opinion until after the election. And I would do these other things that you've got to do, and if you win the election, then you can write the opinions in. If you lose them, somebody else can write them. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. I felt that it was my obligation to do the job of a justice. And one of those jobs is to what? Write those opinions and so forth. Now, one advantage the Chief Justice had was that I believe at that time the Chief Justice had 3 law clerks and the rest of the court didn't have but 2. So that was an advantage that helped me a bit because I got a lot more work out of my law clerks. But it was a real challenge trying to keep the politics involved in the sense of being fair, in fact, leaning over to be fair in various matters. Now, I'll say this, Justice Lake is not here, but he was a gentleman while he was on the court with me. And of course, I didn't like the fact he ran against me, I'll be honest. But he was a gentleman about it. And as far as I know, we never brought the question up during the discussions of the cases or anything of that nature. So I put that out. But if you want a challenge, that's a real challenge, and I think it's historic in the sense that, as far as I know, that's the only thing that's happened there. Now, let me give you one other challenge since I mentioned the political one. One of the jobs of the Chief Justice is to appoint one of the district court judges as chief judge. And if I remember, again, that was at the pleasure of the Chief Justice. So with all of these district court judges, the question was, how do I decide who is going to be the chief judge among all of the judges? And that was not easy, because first of all, I didn't know them all. So I sort of formulated in my own mind how I was going to do it, and I talked with, of course, several people about it. And I said, well, if the person is doing a good job, let the person continue. If the person is not doing a good job, then find, as best you can, another judge on the bench who the people have some confidence in, where we haven't had a lot of criticism and that type of thing, and appoint that particular person. So the plan was easy, but in 2 or 3 districts, there were people who wanted a certain person as their chief district court judge. And of course, I got letters and cards and calls and so forth. And my practice at that time was to send Thomas Hilliard, my assistant, to go to that county and talk with the officials and other people about the situation, and then come back to me and report to me. And if I thought I needed to, I would talk to Tom Ross or somebody else, or maybe even another member of the court, and then make that appointment. But sometimes people were pushing somebody that I couldn't appoint in good faith to head the district court system. And having to turn that person down when the persons pushing that person were sometimes very good friends of mine. And some of them who maybe not have been good friends, but who were very powerful in that particular county. But so that was my second biggest challenge. And I'll quit again and see who else wants to.
Justice Martin and I were on the court together at the time. Chief Justice Frye and Chief Justice Lake were running against each other. And I'm sure Mark feels as I did, that both of them conducted themselves entirely throughout that year as gentlemen and as you would hope that Justice Mitchell, what was your greatest challenge?
Well, there were several actually, and the first that I thought was going to be very difficult and had some anxiety about when I took office was partisanship. We had, for the first time, a cluster of elected Republicans who had come on the court, and I guess we had a majority of Republicans at that time. None of us were quite sure. We've had Republicans pass through before who were appointed and didn't stay long, but these were elected. These were, you couldn't ignore them. And I was really apprehensive about, I knew I was going to try to do things right and ignore that and just get the work of the court done. But I wasn't sure how the chemistry of the court would unfold. And as it wound up, that was about the least problem I had, really. I'm happy to report that partisanship, you don't come from, the way federal judges did, from down on some cloud after managing a president's campaign. It's politics, and so all of us were, in that sense, political people. But on the court, I can honestly say we worked together. I did not see partisanship affect many opinions. It did affect some in the way we voted, in that your political party, to some extent, reflects your political philosophy. And there are not, most cases, overwhelmingly, you're going down well-defined paths of law. But there are those cases where you got an open field running, and it does, and your philosophy does play a part. But that was really, I found it to be tremendously harmonious, every bit as harmonious as when I was an associate, and I and a couple of the other associates would occasionally get red in the face and say ugly things to each other, and we always got over it. But that was a piece of cake. The other a couple other things. There are many that came up in my years there. We became very concerned about the failing professionalism among lawyers, the failure of the courtesies and the considerations and so on, and the failure to focus primarily on public service and secondarily on making a living, which is supposed to be a hallmark of professional. And so I went to the court and asked them to create a Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism, which they did, and we immediately got some of the premier professionals in the state. They're good lawyers, but also recognized for professionalism. One of them, the first name that came to my mind, was the late Howard Twiggs, member of this bar, who just passed away a few weeks ago. He was about as thoroughgoing a professional and as great a human being as I've ever known. Just kind to other people, and that's a big part of professionalism. So we began to work on that, and I think made some headway, and Chief Justice Frye continued that, and as did Lake, and as does Justice Parker today. Another area we were really concerned about, and that was a problem, and I think I did nothing to resolve, is the bog down in civil cases. What people call abuse of discovery. Abuse of discovery when the other side from you, is using the rules for all sorts of things, never when you are, but it really has about gotten out of hand. I mean, it has totally changed in my 41 years, totally changed the civil practice. Used to have a reasonable, very reasonable, and limited amount of discovery, and then go try the case. But it has taken up more and more and more time. People are being run away from the courts into alternative dispute resolution, into settlements, into whether it's arbitration, mediation, just settling cases as a form of extortion. Well, we saw that, and again, I got the court on board and created a commission, balanced plaintiffs' attorneys, defense attorneys, look into it and come back and make some recommendations on how to reform discovery, how to reform trial procedures, to make the civil courts more efficient without sacrificing the quality of justice. They did some great work. And were ready to make a report, and then I retired, and it never went anywhere, which, you know, which is probably my fault. I mean, I should have followed through on it better before I left. So that one was not a home run. But there are so many challenges and so many real legitimate pressing needs. But one thing I will say about, with all the problems, being Chief Justice is a fantastic experience, because you not only see and hear the whiners, you see and hear and associate with the people in this profession who are still using it as a vehicle to serve humanity. And there are more than most of us think in our more cynical hours. It's still the best profession in the world, and we do the best work of any group in the world.
Chief, thank you. I had 3 other questions, but I was thinking that's a good note to end on. But you think we've got 5 more minutes, let me ask this question, because you sort of led me into it, Chief. Chief Justice Mitchell, what is the biggest change you have seen in the legal profession in the probably 45 years now you've been at the bar, close to it, Chief Justice Frye, a little longer than that?
You know, the biggest thing I say, honestly, is I don't think lawyers have as much fun as we used to. I really don't. Part of that is the bar's just gotten a lot bigger. We're dealing with lawyers that you frequently in a case, and I'm still actively practicing, some would say too actively. But a lot of times you deal with lawyers you'll never see again. You don't have the camaraderie, and that's part of the reason why professionalism, I think, has declined. But I just encourage y'all. I remember when this bar association hit 500 members, and we said, God, it's all over now. And maybe it was. I don't, but we knew each other. We got together socially, played ball together. And back in those days, before the white wine days, we drank brown liquor together, fought each other, just had a good time. And lawyers today, I look around my own firm, I'm with Womble Carlisle now. Lawyers just don't have that kind of fun anymore. And it ought to be fun. If you can't get up and look forward to going to work in the morning, wherever you are, you ought to go somewhere else. That's my biggest change.
Chief Justice Frye?
Well, when you get old, you have to be very careful that you don't want to say, let's go back to the olden days. Because some of the olden days weren't as good as we sometimes think they were. But I somehow, and I did think that there were people, leaders in the bar that I ran into generally, who at least I felt were exhibited professionalism in terms of dealing with each other and even in the courtroom. And let me just back up and refer to us with the court. We would get in the courtroom now in our chambers, together to decide how we were going to vote on the case, and we would talk about it. And sometimes we would call each other names, and sometimes we would talk about our law schools. Is that what they taught you in that place? And if somebody else had been in there, there was nobody in there but the judges, no law clerks, no janitors, no anybody else. And if some other people had heard some of what went on, they would say, well, those guys don't like each other. But that's not the case. When we got through, we'd go on down the street and have lunch together, or do something else and talk. And I sort of thought that's the way lawyering was when I first started practicing law. That they would fight in the courtroom and everything, but when they got through, it was, we got back together and talked, laughed, said, well, you missed that, you should, if you'd done that, you might have won the case. In other words, I think that the professionalism is one of the things that, we ought to keep on working on. And, as Chief Justice Mitchell mentioned, the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism has been doing that and going into the law schools and meeting with them. And by the way, I still think we have we changed the head of the Chief Justice's Commission? He should be out there somewhere. Yeah, I had the pleasure of appointing him. Yeah, I appointed the first one. Burley set it up, and then we were a little slow about getting somebody appointed. We wanted to get the best person, and we got the best person, and he's still there all of this time. So that's I think that's one area that I would just like to mention for the profession, that it is a profession, and some things that may be ethically permissible are not professionally okay. And I think if lawyers would think about that in all that you do. And I like the idea that your word is your bond. You shouldn't have to have among lawyers everything in writing between you. If you say that you're going to do something, people ought to be able to say, if you don't do it, that there was something terrible that kept you from doing that. And I think that's the spirit that we ought to have in the profession, because it is a profession. And I talk to people going into law, or talking about going into law, and I asked them a lot of questions. I said, do you like people? You like dealing with people? And lots of other questions that I asked. Now, why do you want to get into it? Well, I heard so-and-so can make a whole lot of money. Well, you can. But if you're going into it solely because it's a way to make some money, if you're not careful, you will let that control your ethics and your professionalism. So, yes, it's okay to make money, but be sure that you give the service that you should give. And so that's the kind of thinking that I have on it.
Well, thank you both.